Every Italian property listing tells you three things: the price, the square meters, and how close the nearest beach is. What the listings never tell you is why the price sits that low, why the energy rating will quietly double your utility bills, why the train station marked on the map closed sometime in the 1980s, and what the phrase "to be restored" actually means once you're standing in front of the building with a builder beside you. Hundreds of listings went into putting this selection together, and for each of the 7 properties here, what the agent left out gets equal attention to what the agent put in, the kind of detail you'd normally only discover after booking the flight. One of these 7 carries a hidden detail, specific enough that it changes how you should evaluate every other property on this list, and that one is being saved for last. 42,000 euros. Starting now. Lanzo Torinese, Piedmont. 42,000 euros. What the listing says: 400 square meters, 3 floors, 7 apartments, valley views, 30 minutes from Turin. What the listing doesn't tell you: air-based heating in the Alps, runs from October through April, and that monthly cost follows you for 7 months of the year. Lanzo Torinese sits about 30 kilometers northwest of Turin, close enough to the city for a proper international airport, a major university, and a functioning urban job market, far enough that the air up here carries a different quality entirely. The valley drops away from the main road in a way that slows you down whether you intended to slow down or not. Inside a frazione called Colombaro, one of those compact rural clusters scattered across Piedmont, a 3-story country house comes listed at 42,000 euros, which converts to roughly 49,000 US dollars for the entire building. What the listing actually describes is 7 apartments spread across 3 floors, each a 3-room unit with double exposure, 1 set of windows facing an internal courtyard, the other opening onto the valley. 6 bedrooms across the property, 400 square meters total. And here's what the listing buries in the technical sheet, rather than leading with: the heating system is independent and air-based. At alpine elevation, that single line is not a minor footnote. It's a monthly cost that arrives every October and doesn't leave until April. Asking the agent for historical utility bills before making any offer will tell you more about what this building actually costs to own than the asking price ever could. The second thing the listing goes quiet about is this: 1 bathroom. For a 400 square meter building, carrying 6 bedrooms, whether the plan runs toward personal use or multi-unit rental income, the plumbing infrastructure work is real money and should be priced before any emotional attachment to the valley view sets in. The kitchen carries a semi-habitable designation in the listing, in Italian real estate language at this price point. That phrasing translates directly to: the room exists, the structure is there, and you will not be cooking in it next week. What keeps pulling the attention back to this one is the arithmetic. 400 square meters, 30 minutes from central Turin, valley views, 42,000 euros. That price to footprint ratio is the kind of number that sends you back to reread the listing to confirm no digit got dropped. None did. But the Alpine heating bill is the number that deserves equal attention. Giuliana, Sicily, 45,000 euros. What the listing says: 8 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, 2,700 square meters of land, train station 2.9 kilometers away. What the listing doesn't tell you: that train line carries no active passenger service. Also, Energy Class G. Before the 8 bedrooms and the 2,500 square meters of land get any attention, the first number worth examining from this listing isn't the price. It's the energy rating. Energy Class G sits at the bottom of Italy's scale. The listing reports an energy performance index of 599 kilowatt hours per square meter per year. And for context, an Italian Class A home falls below 29. This one lands at nearly 600. A structural fact about a farmhouse in Giuliana, a small town in the mountains of Palermo province, that has been classified as to be restored. That phrase means the building stands, the bones are there, but the systems, the insulation, and the energy performance belong entirely to the next owner. The train station listed at 2.9 kilometers away deserves a separate conversation. Rural Sicily's interior lost most of its narrow-gauge passenger lines years ago, and inland areas around Palermo province have no active rail connections at all. A car isn't a convenience here. It's a requirement. That train station reference is a classic listing detail that sounds reassuring and means nothing once you arrive. What the listing does confirm is this: a functioning hospital, the Azienda Sanitaria Provinciale di Palermo, sits 4.4 kilometers out. For a rural Sicilian location at this price, medical access under 5 kilometers is worth marking as a genuine positive rather than a given. Palermo's airport comes in at approximately 59 kilometers, and the coast sits around 20, a 25 to 30-minute drive on roads that wind through the interior. The question's worth bringing before any viewing. Is the roof structurally sound? Are the load-bearing walls intact? And what is the current state of the water and electrical connections? Energy Class G on a to-be-restored property could point toward a cosmetic refresh with new insulation, or it could point toward a full rebuild. And those two outcomes describe two completely different budgets. Here's the pattern that keeps appearing across lists like this one. Most people searching for affordable Italian property are looking at the wrong number. A listing at 45,000 euros gets a screenshot taken of it before anyone stops to ask what happens after the signing. Before the next property, one cost that applies equally to every property on this list, and that the listings never volunteer: total transaction costs in Italy, notaio fees, registration tax, and agent commission combined, typically run between 9 and 15% on top of the purchase price. On a 42,000 euro property, that adds 6,000 to 8,000 euros before a single wall gets touched. On the 110,000 euro Tuscany farmhouse, arriving later in this video, transaction costs alone could reach 10,000 to 16,000 euros. After that comes the IMU, Italy's annual municipal property tax, which varies by region and by whether the property serves as a primary or secondary residence. One practical recommendation that applies to every property on this list: tagged as to be restored. Before engaging any agent, find a local geometra, the Italian equivalent of a surveyor-architect, and pay for a structural opinion. A few hundred euros spent there is the single most effective money in this entire process. Gignis, in the hamlet of Vezzo, Verbano, Cusio, Ossola. 55,000 euros. What the listing says: rustic house, above Lake Maggiore, requires complete renovation. What the listing doesn't tell you: the roof is sound. In rural Italian property at this price, that one sentence rewrites the math. The hamlet of Vezzo sits in the hills above Stresa, 11 kilometers by road, about 15 minutes down to the lakefront. Stresa is one of Lake Maggiore's most visited towns. The Grand Hotel, ferry connections to the Borromean Islands sitting visible in the water. This property looks down on all of it. 3 levels, a garden, stone rural construction built into the hillside. Tucked into the technical description, almost as an aside, the listing mentions that the roof is in good condition. At this price range, a sound roof is not an afterthought. It's the most consequential structural fact in the listing. Replacing a roof on a property this size runs into tens of thousands of euros, and a failing roof means racing against the weather during interior renovation with water ingress and compounding damp, threatening walls and ceilings. Every winter, the property sits open. A sound roof means working inside a weather-tight shell from day one, and that distinction changes the entire renovation experience. Everything else about this property the listing addresses honestly. Complete renovation required. No move-in timeline before serious investment of time and money. The geometry here, though: a structurally sound shell with a good roof, a short drive from Lake Maggiore, at 55,000 euros, is genuinely unusual. For properties below 60,000 with this location profile, this one rises to the top. The hills of Lucca, Tuscany, 68,000 euros. What the listing says: country house, fireplace, 3 bedrooms, hill views, ideal for holiday use, needs maintenance. What the listing doesn't tell you: ideal for holiday use is shorthand for a property not ready for year-round habitation without investment. Whether that investment is cosmetic or structural is the entire question, and the listing doesn't answer it. Lucca earns its reputation without effort. intact medieval walls, a Sunday market stretching for blocks, restaurants that have occupied the same buildings since the 1800s. Outside the city, on the surrounding hills at 68,000 euros, a 2-level country house sits with a covered loggia, a kitchen fireplace, 3 bedrooms, a sitting room, a bathroom, and views across green hillside in every direction. Access runs via 20 meters of cobbled road, charming or a practical constraint, depending on what gets parked there. The basement, accessible only from outside, holds 2 cellar rooms currently used for storage, with potential that depends on what the local planning office considers permissible. What this listing doesn't answer is the question that matters most. What does maintenance work actually mean for this building? Fresh plaster, new fixtures, and updated electrics represent one budget. Foundations, load-bearing walls, and structural roofline repair represent a completely different one. At 68,000 euros in the Lucca Hills, the cosmetic scenario produces rental numbers that work. The structural scenario changes that math entirely, and a geometra visit is the only thing that resolves which scenario applies. What the location does provide is real. Lucca has a hospital, proper train connections, and a functioning local economy. Access isn't the compromise at this price. Renovation certainty is. Martina Franca, Apulia, 70,000 euros. What the listing says: 1 bedroom, 35 square meters, 2,000 square meters of land, trolley requiring restoration. What the listing doesn't tell you: restoring a trollo requires specialist craftspeople trained in a specific regional drystone technique. The listing mentions this once briefly, when it should be the first line of the description. Photographs don't quite capture trolley. Conical stone roofs, whitewashed walls, a building form with roots going back centuries into this region. They were constructed using a dry stone, mortarless method that served a very specific historical purpose. The structures could be taken apart rapidly before royal tax inspectors arrived, a well-documented practice from the period when this area fell under the Kingdom of Naples. When the inspectors came, the trolley came down. When the inspectors left, they went back up, buried in the technical sheet, almost as a footnote rather than a headline. The listing notes that the cones need restoring using the stitch and unstitch technique. That phrase carries real weight. General contractors working in standard construction methods cannot produce the right result here because trello restoration requires craftspeople with specific regional training and a specific dry stone approach. Finding them, scheduling them, and budgeting their work is a different process from a standard rural renovation, and treating it like one is where the budget problems start. The size presents its own honest constraint. 35 square meters of built structure, a beautiful studio with a terrace and Apulian sky overhead, on half an acre of land in one of Italy's most photographed rural landscapes. But a studio. Any expansion plans require planning permission and the right local builder who understands what the communists will and won't approve. At 70,000 euros in Martina Franca, the land value alone justifies serious research, provided the Trullo restoration process is fully understood going in. Rural Abruzzo, the Apennine Hills, 75,000 euros. What the listing says: stone rustico at 700 meters elevation, option to purchase up to 20 hectares, electricity connected, water source nearby, unpaved road access. What the listing doesn't tell you: unpaved but maintained by the municipality means the road exists and can be driven. It doesn't mean the road holds in February mud, that emergency services can reach the property quickly, or that a removal company will agree to the trip at all. This one almost didn't make the list. What the listing actually describes is a stone structure at 700 meters elevation in genuinely isolated Apennine countryside, with electricity already connected, a water source nearby, and the option to acquire up to 20 hectares of surrounding land. To the listing's credit, it's honest about the building itself. Complete renovation or rebuild required. That's a direct statement, not a euphemism. And it tells you plainly that what's being purchased here is a location, a set of land rights, and roughed-in utilities, not a structure, for a specific kind of buyer. That's exactly what they want. A blank slate on a remote hillside with infrastructure already in place to build on. For most buyers, it's a decade-long project with uncertain planning permissions in a rural commune that may carry specific restrictions on what can be built and how. The honest question, worth sitting with before seriously pursuing this property, is whether the goal is a home or a vision of a home, because only one of those can actually be lived in. That's not a disqualification, it's just worth settling before the plane ticket gets booked. Val di Chiana, near Acquaviva di Montepulciano, Tuscany, €110,000. What the listing says: 1800 era farmhouse, 222 square meters, 3.2 hectares, original fireplace, private well, 1 kilometer from the village. What the listing doesn't tell you: nothing. And that's the point. 2 levels, 222 square meters in the main structure. Ground floor, 4 large rooms with 3-meter ceilings, and that ceiling height deserves a pause because the listing flags it as unusual for the period, and the listing is right to. 3 meters of clearance at ground level isn't a cosmetic feature, and it means the renovation potential for an open-plan living space is genuine rather than something being argued into existence. First floor, reached via a classic external Tuscan staircase, 4 rooms, an original 19th century fireplace, a 30 square meter outbuilding functioning as a guest annex or studio, a private well, and 3.2 hectares of agricultural land surrounding the structure, 1 kilometer from the village. That last detail is the one planted at the beginning of this video, and here's why it carries more weight than it might appear to. Nearly every rural Italian property at this price forces the same trade-off: character or convenience. The remote stone farmhouse with no neighbors, or the accessible modern build with no soul. Properties in the Montepulciano area at this price have historically been either deep in the countryside with no services nearby, or small and cramped. This one delivers 222 square meters of 1800s character with 3.2 hectares of land. And the village is a 1 kilometer walk. Bread can be bought on foot. Coffee can be had on foot. Daily life can be lived rather than managed. And that distinction is exactly what most rural Italian properties at this price point cannot offer. The honest trade-off: the systems are inactive and everything needs bringing to standard. In Tuscany, that means navigating planning regulations built around protecting historic structures, a process that moves at its own pace. The renovation won't be cheap or fast. The listing also mentions that the agent offers renovation coordination through local builders, and for anyone buying from abroad who can't supervise the work directly, that service is worth a conversation regardless of which agent ultimately handles the sale. For a property that will hold its character through the renovation, an 1800s terracotta brick from ancient local kilns is genuinely distinctive material. This is the one worth the deepest research. 7 properties. 7 different versions of what an Italian farmhouse actually costs, not just at signing, but over time. For sheer footprint combined with proximity to a major city, the Piedmont property at €42,000 is difficult to argue against, provided the Alpine heating bills have been priced out and the bathroom situation is understood from the start. For location quality, paired with a sound roof at the lowest price point, the Guignese property above Lake Maggiore leads the structural category. For the combination that genuinely rarely appears at this price range, character, access, and land together, the Montepulciano farmhouse at €110,000 is the answer to the question opened at the beginning of this video. Not the cheapest property here, but the one where what matters most in daily life, walking somewhere feeling rooted, living in a place rather than managing a project, comes built into the location itself. The honest verdict: Italy delivers more character per euro than almost anywhere else in Europe, and that character comes attached to complexity, and complexity costs money after the purchase. The price on the listing is never the price paid. The real question in every case is whether a property or a project is being purchased, and whether the project is one that can actually be finished. One question for the comments: The Apulian Trullo at 70,000 euros, sitting in one of Italy's most photographed landscapes, or the Tuscan farmhouse at 110 with the village already a short walk away? The reasoning in the comments tends to be more interesting than the answer itself.